Hi everyone, welcome to Azure Managed Identity tutorial. I am Arogya Das. In this tutorial, we will learn about Azure Managed Identity and how to access Azure SQL database from Azure Function App using Node.js program. Now, let's go into the details. Azure Managed Identity Overview. Azure Managed Identity eliminates the overhead of manually managing credentials, secrets, passwords, and keys within the application code. Azure Key Vault is an alternate solution for the credentials and secrets management, but still, applications need authentication to retrieve credentials from Azure Key Vault, while managed identities do not need this authentication process. Next, managed identities are automatically managed within Microsoft Entra ID, and the application can use them when connecting to resources that support Microsoft Entra authentication. Applications can use managed identities to obtain Microsoft Entra tokens without having to manage any credentials, secrets, keys, and passwords. Next, let's see some of the benefits of managed identities. Managed identities eliminate the process of storing the credentials within the application code, and there are no chances for password leaks. Second, the system assigned managed identities are not even accessible to users. Third, managed identities can be used to authenticate any resource that supports Microsoft Entra authentication. The only action needed is assigning a correct role to the identity on the required resource using IAM. Fourth, there are no additional charges for using managed identities. Next, let's see the managed identity types. There are two types of managed identities. One is system assigned and another one is user assigned. And let's see one by one. System assigned. System assigned managed identity is tied to specific Azure resource such as virtual machine, Azure Function App, Azure App Service, and so on. It can be enabled directly on the resource. Once the system assigned managed identity is enabled on a resource, the service principal is created in Microsoft Entra ID for the identity, and the service principal is tied to the lifecycle of that Azure resource. The system assigned managed identity is deleted along with a resource deletion. That is, if you delete a resource, the system assigned managed identity also gets deleted. Next, user assigned. User assigned managed identity is created as a standalone Azure resource and assigned to one or more Azure resources. Once the user assigned managed identity is enabled, a service principal of a special type is created in Microsoft Entra ID for the identity, and the service principal is managed separately from the resources that use it. So that's the difference between system assigned and user assigned managed identity. User assigned managed identities can be used by multiple resources. As user assigned managed identities are used by multiple Azure resources, these are not deleted automatically along with the resource deletion, and they have to be deleted manually. Next, prerequisites. For this tutorial, you need to have the below setup completed beforehand. Also, I have given the links in the description for the required setup. First, you need to have an Azure account and you can create a free account. Next, Visual Studio Code. First, Install the VS Code and then install Azure Functions core tools and Azure Functions extension from VS Code. This has to be done in your local machine. Next, you need to have Postman installed so that we can test the function from the Postman. All the download links and source code for this hands-on are available in my GitHub account. Please download them and use it. For the SQL scripts, refer to Azure SQL database section in the README file, and you can get the GitHub URL from the description. Next, let's see the managed identity hands-on. So for this, first we will create an Azure SQL database from the Azure portal and set Microsoft Entra admin option to enable the Microsoft Entra authentication so that we can connect to SQL database as Microsoft Entra ID user. Then we will create a table named customers and insert some data for our testing purpose. Next, we will create Azure Function App and enable the system assign managed identity for the Azure Function App. Then we will deploy Azure Function to Function App from VS Code. The Azure function is written in Node.js and it will use the system assigned managed identity to connect to SQL database. And as you know by now, no DB username or password is required for the database access due to managed identity. Next, we need to grant the SQL database access permission to the system assigned managed identity. For this, we need to create user and assign the DB data reader and DB data writer role to the user. Next, we'll test it by invoking the Azure function from the Postman and check if the data is retrieved from the Azure SQL database successfully by the Azure function. Now, let's do the hands-on. I have signed into my Azure account. Now, let's create the SQL database as a first step. So, as I have created SQL database many times, the SQL database service icon is displayed here. If you are doing it for the first time, you type here Azure SQL database. So here it will come SQL databases. Then click create SQL database. So here it will ask you for the free tier usage. So you can click this button apply offer and make use of the free offer. So click this, then select the subscription and select your resource group, then enter the database name. So I have already the name. Then we need to create the server for the database. So click this create new button and enter the server name. And then select your region. So here this authentication method, as I said in the theory part, we will be connecting this or accessing the database using the Microsoft Entra ID user. So I will select only this use Microsoft Entra only authentication. To allow the Microsoft Entra ID user, we need to enable this set admin privilege. So here in this screen you select which user you want to authenticate. So I will select my user and set as admin for this database. Once this is done, once you have set, then click OK. Then it will come back to the basic details of the section. Next, go to the networking tab, and for the connectivity I need public endpoint. So I will be accessing my database publicly. So select this public endpoint and allow Azure services and resources to access this server. Since we will be accessing this SQL database from function app, set this one to yes. So allow other Azure services. And since I will be creating the user and adding some rows from my local machine to access this database, we will set this add current client IP address to yes. So please make sure that these two are set correctly. Then other details we can set it as default. Also here, if you notice, the cost details will be displayed. Since we are using the free tier, free usage, so for this it says 0 USD. Next, click security button. So here we don't need, I will go for the default settings, and for the additional settings, next we'll go to the additional settings. Here also I will go for the default ones. Then click tags, and next click review and create. Then just check whether the details are correct or not in the summary screen. If they are okay, then click the create button, so that it will start creating the Azure SQL database. So creating this database may take a few minutes. Let's pause this video until the database gets created. The database deployment has been completed. Now let's go to the database and create a table and insert some records. So click this, go to resource, and it will take you to the database. Now click this query editor to connect to the database, and we will do some DDL and DML operation. Since we have authorized Microsoft Entra ID user, so we'll connect as Microsoft Entra ID user. So click this continue as this Microsoft Entra ID user, then it will get connected. So here you can see that your database name is displayed here. Now enter the, if you click these tables, so no tables are there. Now we will create a table. I have already a script, and I have given all the scripts in my GitHub account. You can use it. So paste it here, then click run. So query succeeded and affected rows. Now if we click these tables, it should show the refresh here. Click. So it will show the table name. So we are sure that the table has been created. Now let's create some records. So it has created one record. We'll create another record. We'll create one more record. So let's check whether all the records are inserted successfully using the select query. So we can see that there are 3 records inserted here. Now here this customer, just I want to give a simple explanation of this SQL script. So if you see here, the table is created with the customer ID as the identity column. Identity. So that means this will be, the customer ID will be automatically incremented by the database. So we don't need to input the value. That is, it's a sequence column. So now we have created the database and created the table and inserted some records. Now next let's go and create the Azure function app. So for this, let's go to the
home screen. Okay, and you can type here function, so it will display here, and click create function app. So for the free tier we can use the consumption plan and click select and give the subscription and resource group, then the function of name. So for the runtime stack, we'll go for Node.js, and the operating system will be Linux. I will go for Linux. Then click on this storage button. So here it will create a new blob storage automatically. If you have already one, you can select that one. And I don't need Azure file connection, so I will uncheck this. Then for the networking, so we'll be accessing from this function from the function of from the public. So set this to on. And next for monitoring, so I don't need any monitoring for this, just select no, then click deployment button. So leave all those other options as a default. Then you can go for tags. So I'm not entering tags. Click review and create. So this will display the summary of the function of details. Once you are sure, then click create button to create the function of. So this may take a few seconds to create this function of. Let's pause this video. The function of deployment has been completed. So let's go to the function of overview details and do the necessary configuration. So for this function of, we need to do two things. One is enable or add the system assigned managed identity. Then next, we need to set up the database server name and the database name environment variable, which we will be using in the Azure functions code, the nodejs code to access the SQL database. So here to enable the add the system assigned managed identity, go to settings, click on this identity, and here you can see, as we saw in the theory, there are two types of managed identities. One is system assigned, another one is user assigned. Here now this system assigned is selected and you can see the status is off. So now we will set it to on and we will use this system assigned managed identity to access Azure SQL database. So select enable this one, click this on and click save button. So it will ask this confirmation. So click yes. And this may take a few seconds. Now let's go to the environment variables section and add the two parameters which I set already. So you can see the system assigned managed identity is enabled. Click on this environment variables and click add button and add the DB server name and the database name. So for the DB server name, go to the Azure SQL database overview menu. Then you can see the server name here. Copy this one and paste it here and click apply. So here if you click show value, it will show the value. Next, we need to add another environment variable for the database name. Click add button and copy the DB name variable and again go to the Azure SQL database. Here at the top you can see the database name being displayed. You can copy this or this part and paste it in the value. So click on apply and we have created both these. Now we have created the Azure function app. Next we need to create a user and identity at the SQL database side to allow this function app to access the SQL database. Now let's go to the Azure SQL database and create a identity user for this Azure function app. Now we again go to the Azure SQL database, click on this query editor and connect it. Then you need to create a user for that function app. So here create user, I will explain here. So here create user, this is the function app name, managed ID function app demo from external provider. So we are authenticating function app to access this Azure SQL database. Now click on run. So this has succeeded. So that means the user is created. Next, we need to give permissions to read and write permissions. So here, so for this again, this role DB data reader and DB data writer role is being assigned to this managed identity, the function app through managed identity. Now select this both and click run and we can see that the query has succeeded successfully. So as of now, we have completed the SQL database creation, function app creation, and the required configuration settings for the managed identity. Next, let's deploy the Azure function, that is Node.js program, to access the SQL database. As I have already said, so I have the Node.js program in my GitHub account. So you can clone that code to your local environment and deploy the function from the Visual Studio Code. So I have already cloned the code from my GitHub and I have opened in the Visual Studio. So let me just give you a brief explanation about this code, what it is going to do. First, here if you see this at Azure function app and at Azure identity. So here actually we are importing these to Azure library here for authentication purpose. Next, since we are connecting to the Azure SQL database, we are importing the MySQL library also. Next, this function will run asynchronously, this get data function. So here from the function app, this request and context will have the values. So the request will have the all the request parameter and the payload data. Next here this part. So here is the database configuration access connection or authentication details. Here, as I mentioned, in the function app, we have added this DB server name and DB name. So this process.env.db name, this will get the variable values from the function app. Then next, we are using the authentication. So here, this authentication type, we have various types. For example, here I am using this authentication as Azure Active Directory MSI VM. We have also other authentication types such as Azure Active Directory App Service and also some other authentication types are also available. Next here, this credential, we are using the default Azure credential class from the identity library. So this part is essentially for the database access configuration. Next, we are reading the request parameter. So the Azure function will pass, for the Azure function will pass a query parameter named ID with the value which we'll be using in the select query. So here in this if condition, we are checking whether there is a query parameter ID which is assigned to customer ID here, and if it is, whether it is found or not. If it is not found, then it will return this query parameter missing. So that's a, it's a check logic here. Next, if we come, we have put in the try catch block the SQL connection and the data fetching. Here we are getting the SQL connection using the config. So here we have the config setup and passing this to get the SQL connection. After getting the SQL connection, we are selecting the data from the customers table where customer ID equal to at ID. So here the request parameter which we received, that value we are passing here. So for the customer for the SQL database, we have already created the customers table and inserted few rows. So we once we execute this function, it should fetch the data from that, and the result is being assigned to this variable result set. So and that result set we are passing into the response data. So once this select is successfully completed, it will return this record set, that output to this result set, and we are passing that one, and it will be displayed on the, it will be returned as a response. Then in the catch block, we are having, if any error occurs, that error will be caught and sent as a response. So, and finally, to avoid any leaks, resource leaks, we are closing that SQL connection. And here, this is the entry point where the function will be called. So here we have mentioned for the HTTP this function name, then the handler as the get data function. So once the function is invoked through the URL, this will be invoked, and then the get function will get called, and the function will get executed and process the data. Now let's deploy this function to the Azure function app that we have created through the Azure portal. For this, open the command palette using the F1 key. Here you can type Azure function and it will display these Azure functions deploy. So here select this Azure functions deploy to function app, and here you need to sign up to the Azure account using this. Once you click this button, and it will display here sign in. So you need to get signed into the your Azure account so that you can access the Azure resources that are available in the Azure cloud from the VS Code. So since I have already signed in, here the function of which I created in the Azure portal is displayed here. Select this one, and it will ask, are you sure you want to deploy? Yes, click this deploy button and it will start deploying. So this may take a few seconds. Let's pause this video until it gets completed. Once the deployment is completed, it will show here this one. So here deployment to managed ID function of demo has been completed. So here if you click this view output, you can see the deployment details. Now let's go to the Azure portal and check from the function app whether our function has been deployed correctly or not. Click this overview and you can see that the function app has been deployed. So click this and you can see the code here. Your function has been deployed correctly. Now to test it, we can click this test or run, or get this function URL, copy it and put it in the Postman, and here as I said, we need to pass the query parameter ID as the query parameter and the value. So here I am passing 1 as the value as customer ID and click this send button. So you can see that the data for the customer ID 1 has been retrieved successfully. Now to cross check, let's go to our database and see all the data, whether the data has been retrieved correctly or not. So we can see that for the customer ID 1, the name Suzuki Ichiro, Azure SQL 100 dummy gmail.com. So this has been retrieved. So we can see the same value is retrieved. Now let's pass this customer ID as 3. So for the customer ID 3, we can see that Kasaibashi Nishi Azure SQL DB 102 dummy. So this value has been retrieved. So we are now using the Azure Managed System Assigned Managed Identity. We have learned how to connect to the Azure SQL database and retrieve the data. We have tested this one from this Postman. Suppose if I give, say, non-existent ID, it should throw and return an error message. See, message, it's coming as a blank. So finally, now we have created many resources for our tutorial. So we need to clean up those resources so that we can avoid unnecessary charges. So first, let's go to the Azure portal and go to your resource group. Select your resource group under which you created all the resources. Then click this delete button and it will delete all the resources from your Azure cloud. So click delete and click this delete button. That's all in this tutorial. Thank you very much for your time and patience in watching this long video. A simple request, please like, subscribe and share to your friends if you found this video useful. Thank you once again.